Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Rick Warner with his talk titled, Wabash Always Fights, version 2022. Dr. Rick Warner is in his 24th year of teaching at Wabash College. He offers courses in Latin American, African, U.S., and world history, often with an emphasis on food history. Professionally, he has served as Vice President and President of the World History Association and served for many years on the National Test Committee for the Advanced Placement College Board Test on World History. Prior to becoming a professor, Dr. Warner earned his living as a professional chef and publican tavern owner in California. He has been an honorary Sphinx Club member for over 15 years and has served as the club's advisor for the past couple of years. Dr. Warner has also served at one time, and in many cases at present, in advising capacity to the Barbecue Club, La Alianza, Phi Delta Theta, the War Council, and the Cooking Club. Dr. Warner is an honorary Wabash alumnus of the class of 2013. Please give a warm welcome for Dr. Rick Warner.
Thank you. Good morning, Wabash. I'm sitting because I have a well-advertised hip problem that's really bugging me, so sorry. Well, not sorry, but it's great to be here. Well, you know, as everyone in this room realizes, our motto here is Wabash Always Fights. I sat in the stands of the football stadium last Saturday with a faculty friend who has been here only a couple of years, and thus is still an avid student of our traditions. I imagine he's out there. In the second quarter, things were not looking so great. And in fact, things were not looking great until the late fourth quarter, as we all know. And as we sat there, somewhat worried in the second quarter, I offered some reflections on being a fan for 24 years. Our team has often played better in the fourth quarter than our other opponents. I've also believe that this is partly due to the early morning workouts that they undergo in the off season, which I know about because I see the players in my 0800 class in the spring semester. A larger factor is attitude, however. The Wabash Always Fights attitude prevailed in the latter part of that fourth quarter this week. All credit must go to the team. That said, I will note that much of the crowd also began to re-energize late in the fourth quarter, and I think that some credit for that is due to my Sphinx Club brothers, who were cheering so energetically that we felt sweaty enough to remove our shirts in the passion of the moment. If you don't know, ask. Okay, now to serious business, more or less. As my colleagues will attest, we like to read history papers that feature the thesis underlined toward the beginning of the paper. When this trend first became common here, I simply assumed that this is helpful as we work through a stack of student prose, perhaps on our third glass of wine in the evening, or in my case, more than that. So here's the takeaway thesis right up front that's underlined. Investigate your vulnerability and embrace your humility. I promise it'll make more sense in 15 minutes. And no souls are saved after 20 minutes, so I'm not going to keep you through lunch here. I truly appreciate the enthusiasm in the college, on and off the playing field. It does make us unique in some ways. And that said, I will confess that the word fight is not a favorite of mine. By personality, I don't think I'm particularly competitive. And furthermore, I identified as a Quaker or a member of this Society of Friends, and one of our principal religious beliefs can be summed up in the phrase, we're already against the next war. So that's a difficult position to relate to for many of us, I understand. Perhaps even irrational, but that's how religious ideas can seem to other people at times. So I've never been interested in fighting physically. But fighting against the powers that be, maybe, yeah, because, you know, I am a child of the 60s, so I can relate to that. I do, on the other hand, recognize and respect the desire to fight from within, to find an answer to a dilemma when there seems to be none, to draw on inner strength to bring about change. Such our football team did this last Saturday. Finding inner strength is an important process. Perhaps you have heard the term from Islam, jihad, which unfortunately is often associated with the missionary violence such as we saw on 9/11. But for most Muslims, that term has a much different internal focus related to self-improvement. So it's helpful that way. We all fight an internal battle from within to improve ourselves. It is in this sense that jihad has caused me to reflect on the meaning of fighting, or in our own parlance, to reflect on Wabash Always Fights. And this fighting spirit is within us as we work past our roadblocks. In a personal sense, we learn to minimize forces that distract us. We work hard to learn in our new ways, and we keep our minds open to new ideas. That's a liberal arts college dictum. And we try not to give up too easily. As in football, so in life. Let's take a deeper dive into this internal struggle or growth may involve, see what it may involve. I'm going to go at this in relation to the vast majority of my audience here, those who identify as men. I came to Wabash in 1999. It's fair to say that a good number of my older faculty colleagues were still somewhat concerned about the decision made in 1992 to remain a college for men. It was difficult to speak about matters of gender in those early days of my professorship here. I actually asked President Ford a question on the first and only day of faculty orientation. Faculty orientation is like 4 or 5 days, but it was like a half a day back then. I asked him a question after he explained the nature of our college for men, and I was curious. I said, how might it be to teach here as a woman? And here's your pro tip, right? It's not always a good idea to ask your boss a challenging question on the first day of your job. But maybe it is a good idea. So after stammering a bit, he concluded that he could not know the answer to that question, which is good enough, I suppose. But what was more interesting was that, 3 people who were not even in the room at the time individually saw me on campus later, and they said they'd heard that I asked that question. And then they were like, you actually asked a gender question of the president as a newbie? Like, yeah. I thought, wow, this place is small, and this subject is touchy. Now, that being said, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since 1999. I do think that we need to continue our work to open ourselves up on questions of gender and race and ethnicity and sexual orientation. But the tide has shifted considerably since 1999. We've witnessed the impressive rise of gender studies as a program here and a set of courses. You can take a course and talk about fatherhood with other guys. I highly recommend that. My only problem with that course is he only teaches it once a year. I'm like, dude, every semester. He's on sabbatical now, sorry. But take that course. Fatherhood is great. You can hear the perspective of some brilliant female faculty in their courses who will broaden your horizon as they broaden my horizon. Additionally, gender issues have been increasingly engaged in other courses such as history surveys, freshman tutorials, enduring questions, and others. And I think these are hopeful signs. We've basically taken this and we turned the whole critique upside down by going after improving ourselves on gender issues within the context of all male education. I think that's really something to be celebrated. So the rise in gender studies in our curriculum comes at a significant time of social change in our society at large. And in my youth, when I was your age, as we say, men would attend and finish college more likely at a higher rate than women. Many good changes have since occurred to empower women, and now more women are attending college and finishing than men. While trumpeting the support for these ongoing changes, and I am happy about them, I do think that it's important for us to take a closer look about what's happening to men in our society. As has been highlighted in other chapel talks and elsewhere, there are increasing concerns about men's mental health. Suicide rates for young men are quite concerning. And we know much of about these kinds of things from our experience on our own campus, but it is happening across our society generally. We need to get after this. We need to start thinking about things in a different way. I was quite pleased to hear my young colleague Eric Dunaway last week in this space recommend the counseling services, to the point that he's offered to walk somebody over there if that's helpful. I make that same offer today. And I think he also signed up the Sphinx Club for that offer. Get help. It's not, don't be ashamed about that, right? We all need it. So there's also an endless supply of cake muffins in my office, and you're welcome to come by and chat if you'd like. I had a student, I did this the last couple of years, and I did have a student, I won't tell you what his name is, but he's a twin, and he's fatter than his brother. And he always came by for a free muffin. So, I'm sure you can figure out who it was. He's since graduated, so I can talk smack about him. But yeah, he liked those muffins. But you're welcome to come by either way. If you want to talk, whatever. So I'd like to take this discussion of what might be called the new masculinity to a more personal level. So one of the best aspects of Wabash for me is I feel, free to openly share my feelings with you all about even the most sensitive subjects. I love that about our place. And I don't think that everybody has to do that, but I feel that way. I have never once felt shamed here by anybody. And as you may know, I delivered a chapel talk in this space in February 2020. It is on YouTube if you want to go take a look. In that talk, I revealed to the community a struggle that I secretly faced for years. Put very simply, I'm an alcoholic. Or if you prefer another term, I suffer from alcohol use disorder. Words don't matter to me. The point is that I can't take a drink, or I'll be drinking many. Thanks to changes in my brain chemistry, 1 turns into 100. So if you're interested in that subject, come see me. I'm likely to talk your ear off, but if you want to talk about that, come on by. But my point here is that I'm able to make such a confession back, I was only 6 months sober, that demonstrates a great trust that I have in this community. I would never expect anyone else to make such a confession. As you probably know, anonymity is very critical for most people who are on that path. But in my own case, I felt safe, more than I felt vulnerable. So I learned last year, instead of adopting New Year's resolutions these days, people have been doing this for a while, but I'm kind of slow to come out to figure things out, that people focus on a word for the year. So my word for the year is vulnerability. This is what I think about quite a lot. My participation in sober communities online, namely the Luckiest Club and the I Am Sober app, where I've met literally thousands of people across the world who are in recovery. It's been absolutely amazing. That's helped me to sharpen these tools. And to be honest, most of the people I know in these online communities are women. It's interesting to think about why that might be. But they're all trying to stay sober, like myself. And the large Zooms in TLC in particular are literally over 90% female. This is very fascinating in terms of what's going on. But it's benefited me greatly. So what this meant for me personally is that I've heard many female voices discussing vulnerable topics. I feel like I know how to be a better husband after hearing a lot of complaint about their husbands, for one thing. But lots of stuff, has been coming up. Stuff that, as a man, I probably have pushed down because that's what I was taught to do, right? And so this has helped me to investigate other sides of myself. I'm learning to fight my sober battle with the sensitivity that I've learned from these friends and by examining my own assumptions in my own life. For me, the new masculinity, which I like to call it, is about shedding some of the strong ingrown attitudes that society has encouraged in me and that have been shrouded in what is thought of as masculinity. I'll also say that being related to multiple feminists has not hurt this cause. My mother, who recently passed, was one badass feminist activist, believe me. She's listening to me right now. And so is my mother-in-law, who's still alive, and to a good degree, all the other women in my family, including my daughter, who's named after 2 19th century feminists, the Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina. And those of you guys in History 241 will be studying about the Grimke sisters pretty soon. Partly due to my sober work and partly due to my work at Wabash, I've been engaging some interesting literature on these matters as well. So I taught the book by Liz Plank, who actually gave a Zoom address to us a year and a half ago. I taught in my EQ session. It's called For the Love of Men. She was very respectful outlook on what some call toxic masculinity. And she does open up some very interesting questions for men to consider as we engage our vulnerability. As with the AA term, character defects, I prefer to reframe these ideas in a more positive direction. So instead of I'd like to speak of the new masculinity instead of toxic masculinity, and personal growth instead of character defects. But same idea, put a positive spin on the changes that are happening and need to happen. I've also read some books that I've discovered in sobriety by Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle, who have helped me understand the role of shame and the necessity of setting boundaries in our self-growth. Sometimes these are boundaries against things you really like to do. I actually just set a positive boundary I'll share with you right now. My original inclination was to make 300 cake muffins for this event today. And you know I could do it. But I've got a pretty severe hip problem right now. I really should not be on my feet, so I made one batch there in my office. But I had to set a positive boundary, right? And so you got to set negative boundaries against people that are toxic or things that are toxic. So boundaries are very important to think about. And all these matters, though, are changing according to gender lines in society, in my opinion. On the upside, as men, we're starting to learn to appreciate our emotions more, right? I appreciate my vulnerability more, right? I have a box of tissues stationed next to my computer for these sober Zoom calls, because when somebody starts telling me a story that just hits me in the feels, I'm going to let go. And I didn't used to be like that, right? On the challenging side, that learning process can be difficult, which is partly why we're seeing an uptick in the mental health cases amongst our gender, and that is definitely something that's happening. So, where does all this leave us with Wabash Always Fights? By now you're wondering, the title is misleading. I've come to realize that the path to growth leads right through the jungle of vulnerability. We need to feel uncertain and vulnerable. It can indeed be a humbling path. In my own life, I need to sit with that. Then I need to talk with people when I feel uneasy. In sobriety, I need to talk to other people that are on the sober trail. But just like in recovery circles, this process is a circle of mutual support. Right? When we're feeling right about ourselves, we should be reaching out to others to help them. I communicate weekly with scores of people who are working their sobriety. And here at Wabash, as Professor Dunaway did stress last week, we also need to fight together for one another. Watch out for your brothers. We all should be willing to allow vulnerability to identify our true feelings. It's a humbling process, one that should keep us on track for further victories on the playing field, as well as in our academics and our personal lives. We will continue to have chapel sing. We will not shave W's into the heads of those who do not know the song anymore. We will strive to keep the big T tradition alive, even as the little t, it changes over time as a little t tradition. We will strive to be men who think critically, act responsibly, lead effectively, and live humanely. And as one of my colleagues once suggested 20 years ago, perhaps we should add a fifth bullet point there, feel authentically. At the time I thought it was crazy, but I don't know. Or not. Let's just do it without changing the official language of the mission statement. Let's learn how to feel authentically. To borrow from the sober world, I will say that one day at a time, we are all works in progress, myself included. It's certainly true for this 66-year-old man that's speaking today. Now, I'm going to restate my thesis, which is underlined, which is what you're supposed to do. I've tried to investigate my vulnerability here and will continue to embrace my humility. I'm still working on it, especially the second piece, the humility piece. I wish you all well as you show the world that we are Wabash. We are strong. We're sensitive. Wabash always fights. Thank you.